what we call 100,000 units, and this is about 6,000 times higher than in a normal person. The dioxin found was the most potent dioxin of all the dioxins that we know of.
Brewer had found the proof. Victor Yuschenko was the victim of poisoning. No one had ever been deliberately poisoned with dioxin before. The experts are baffled.
It's still not clear to me why somebody would use dioxin, because we know that dioxin actually is not a regular poison.
The poison used was an exceptionally pure sample of the most powerful form of dioxin, called TCDD. This is how much Yuschenko had consumed. This much more would almost certainly have been fatal.
The lethal dose is less than 5 milligrams. That is an absolutely tiny amount. That's, a trivial amount, you could almost say. So it's an extremely toxic substance.
The dose he was given resulted in extreme changes in his body chemistry.
It will have damaged the cells in the lining of the gut, and there'll be bleeding almost from top to bottom of the gut. After that, the liver will take a hit, and the pancreas.
Back in Vienna, the doctors at last knew what they were dealing with. They try a radical treatment, surgically implanting a permanent pain-killing drip into his spine, like a 24-hour-a-day epidural.
It's an extreme treatment, yeah.
On the 17th of October, after 6 days in hospital, Yuschenko returns to Ukraine, painkillers pumping around his body.
Політиків, які сьогодні стоять у керма держави. Вранці
He still faces a tough election battle against an opponent who's prepared to use every dirty trick in the book.
і для України, і для нас слова.
До конца выборов оставалось.
There were 2 weeks left till the election. Not to return meant to lose the campaign. He was in a serious state. His face was disfigured, but we decided to fly. We landed to a rally of 150,000 people. In the plane and on the road to the rally, I held the drip connected to the implanted machine. Before the rally, we switched it off and disconnected it. We had to walk through the crowd, where everyone was blessing and wanting to touch him. Immediately after the rally, the pain relief was switched back on. That's how we survived.
On November the 21st, the final round of the election is held. It's Yuschenko versus Yanukovych, head-to-head. Yuschenko's still on the pain-killing drip. Only the drugs are keeping him going. The results come in overnight. Yuschenko has lost. Immediately after the election in Ukraine, there are accusations of fraud. Yuschenko supporters take to the streets demanding a revote. They camp out in Kiev's Independence Square in the snow. Inside Yuschenko's body, the dioxin is still doing damage. It's 48 days since the poisoning. On November the 30th, the Supreme Court rejects the election result and demands a revote. Everyone wants to know who was behind the poisoning. In Kiev, there's one clear suspect: the host at the dacha, Volodymyr Satsuk, the most ruthless senior officer in the Ukrainian Secret Service, with a known interest in poison.
An old friend of his told me that in his days in military intelligence, Volodymyr Satsuk was very interested in poisons. It was his hobby.
But even if it's proved Satsuk administered the poison, the crucial question is who was behind it. Yuschenko's opponents were supported by Moscow. Vladimir Putin is a former KGB colonel. Many believe the Kremlin actively participated in the poisoning. A recording has emerged which seems to support these suspicions.
Two people, one from Kiev, one from Moscow, talk about the poisoning of Yuschenko. The person from Kiev says that the poisoning was organized by an advisor of Vladimir Putin.
The conversation involves a Kiev official, close to the poison investigation, and a Kremlin bureaucrat. They blame the idea for the poisoning on Gleb Pavlovsky, Putin's top spin doctor.
Алло.
Добрый день.
Добрый.
Многоходовка.
Да. Как только Россия скажет, что никакого отношения не имела, есть люди с признательными показаниями. И этим Павловским драпать надо будет довольно далеко.
If true, the recording suggests the orders to poison Yuschenko may have come from the Kremlin itself.
А Павловские что, общались
По этому вопросу?
и могли его отравить?
Нет, автор идеи. Автор идеи и организатор. Так сказать, идейный вдохновитель, понимаете, да?
My first reaction was to check whether this conversation was genuine or a fake. I found one of the people on the tape. He confirmed not only the conversation, but also the facts he talks about in the conversation.
Это что, этот мудак выдвигал какую идею?
Абсолютно.
The truth may never be known, but many people in Kiev believe this was an international conspiracy. It seems insane. Even in the Soviet Union, poison had gone out of fashion. But it's back. The Yuschenko case isn't a one-off. For modern Moscow, it seems poison is just politics by other means. The countries of the former Soviet Union are being swept by a wave of poisonings. Chechen warlord Omar ibn Khattab was a terrorist to the Russians, a freedom fighter to his supporters. On the 8th of July 2003, he received a letter outlining financial dealings carried out by his organization. After he'd read it, as was his usual security practice, he burned it. The letter was impregnated with poison. Khattab was dead within seconds. The Secret Service claimed responsibility. But it isn't just Chechnya that has seen mysterious deaths. Anna Politkovskaya is a fiercely outspoken journalist, working for one of Moscow's few remaining independent newspapers. Anna's colleague, Yuri Shchekochikin, was also a member of parliament. He used his political position to uncover a series of scandals involving the government. It cost him his life. In 2003, he returned from a business trip feeling unwell.
The last time I saw him, he simply felt unwell. He seemed to have some kind of flu. There were still no suspicions.
Yuri was taken to hospital. There was little doctors could do but watch him deteriorate.
When his skin began to fall off, of course all his nerve endings were exposed, and no one can live with that level of pain. He was basically kept going by powerful painkillers.
Yuri spent 10 days in agony.
When he was lying in his coffin at his funeral, he had no skin left and almost no hair. He went from being a vivacious man in his 50s to a 90-year-old.
By the time of the funeral, no one was allowed to get close enough to the body to collect the evidence that might have proved he was poisoned, and who was behind it.
There was never an autopsy. It was not allowed by the authorities. And the relatives were not allowed to even come close to him during the funerals.
In London, John Henry has looked at the evidence to try to identify how Yuri was killed.
My own feeling is it sounds most like radiation sickness, that he was given a very potent radioactive chemical, which could have been easily tasteless and totally unnoticeable.
Most radioactive chemicals can't be absorbed by the body, but Lab X found one that could: thallium.
Many people suspect he was poisoned by the KGB. Radioactive thallium, it would be used in different forms. Tiny pills put in a beverage, and that would be enough.
Radiation sickness is a very, very gruesome illness because it's not absolutely immediate. It's going to take days for death to occur. And during that time, you know that you're a goner. There is absolutely nothing you can do. It's a very nasty death.
Stanley Lekarev is an instructor at the Secret Service Academy in Moscow. His view is that of an insider. He has no problem with Yuri's elimination.
Shchekochikin is our citizen. He's just, do with him whatever you want, and you have no risk.
The most frightening thing about his death is that the people who planned the murder, they didn't just shoot him. they turned him into a monster.
The poisoning was a warning to all journalists. Yuri wasn't the only victim. Anna's been highly outspoken in her work, and she too has been poisoned. She was traveling south to cover the Beslan school siege in 2004. She boarded a plane for Rostov.
The only thing she had during the flight was tea, but the tea was served by the attendant, and as we know, of course, the attendant could be KGB.
Anna felt weak and collapsed. She was rushed to hospital and spent 5 days in and out of consciousness. She still hasn't fully recovered.
Every day I have to struggle with my health in order to be able to work.
Anna finds it impossible to talk directly about what happened to her. She lives in fear of a repeat attempt on her life.
I no longer sniff flowers. I don't eat presents from strangers, especially if they're left for me at reception.
Despite her fears, Anna goes on with her work. She won't let the poisoners win. Victor Yuschenko doesn't give in. He confronts the poison head-on. He appears during the mass protests without cosmetics, to tell his supporters that his scarred face represents the dirty politics of Ukraine. The first election was snatched out from under his nose. He has another chance on Boxing Day 2004. Second time around, Yuschenko wins. He's sworn in early 2005.
Я, Віктор Ющенко, волею народу обраний президентом України.
An official investigation is underway into the poisoning. One piece of evidence may eventually prove who the culprit was: the dioxin in Yuschenko's own body.
Given a sample of dioxin, a good analyst may well be able to tell where it comes from. This is because there are many structural differences in the same chemical. And it's the mix of those slightly different variants that will give you the fingerprint, if you wish, of where it was made.
In Amsterdam, Bram Brewer is trying to find that fingerprint. Matching it with other samples in his library, he'll be able to track it to a specific lab or factory. But his results may never become public. Some believe the Yuschenko camp already know where the dioxin came from. But now Yuschenko's the president of Ukraine. Maintaining a good relationship with Moscow is more important. For toxicologist John Henry, the choice of dioxin makes this the most cunning poisoning he's ever come across.
If he died within 4 or 5 days, nobody on earth would have thought of dioxins. He had a very severe gastroenteritis. They might have thought of a rare bacterial illness. They might have thought of some other type of poison. But I don't think anyone would have thought of dioxin.
The meal at the dacha wasn't enough to stop Yuschenko becoming president. But even if they only meant to put him out of the race, it may kill him in the end.
I would say that giving dioxin to Mr. Yuschenko was a ruthless and brutal decision because there's a certain irreversibility about it. Most people have said he's going to be better in a year or 2 or 3. I think it's a life sentence.
The dioxin will remain in his body for the rest of his life. It may shorten it. There's an increased risk of heart disease and cancer. Yuschenko's skin will never recover. It's a mistake his bodyguard will never make again.
Of course I was furious. It was a mistake to let him go in someone else's car with no security. We broke all our own rules. That was the only time we did it.
Like all poisonings, it sends a potent message of terror to all opponents of the regime.
I think the bullet's out of fashion. The state assassin doesn't consider the bullet makes a big enough impression on our citizens anymore.
This is the 21st century. It's not meant to happen anymore, but it's undeniable.